My daughter chose the woman who abandoned us over the man who raised her. That's not a metaphor. That's not a figure of speech. That is the truth I had to swallow the night my only child, Emily Sullivan, called me to say I was banned from her wedding. Imagine devoting 22 years, every scraped knee, every late bill, every college loan payment, and being told you're not worthy of a seat, not even worthy of walking her down the aisle. Instead, she handed that honor to Rachel Carter, her biological mother, who disappeared when Emily was 3 years old. That's where this family drama begins. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just smiled and said, "Congratulations, sweetheart. I hope it's everything you dreamed of." But make no mistake, that smile wasn't surrender. It was calculation. Because while Rachel and Emily were busy posting about healing and authentic family online, I was pulling out 22 years of receipts, bank statements, loan documents, and ownership papers. You see, Emily thought she had walked away from me clean. What she didn't know was that I had been paying her student loans every single month. What she didn't know was that her dream wedding venue had been secured with my cashier's check. What she didn't know was that the classic car her fiancé rented to propose in was sitting in my garage because I owned it. And what Rachel didn't know, what she could never imagine, is that abandoning a family comes with a price tag, a price that grows interest year after year until the day it comes due. That day was Emily's wedding. That was the wedding reveal no one saw coming. This isn't just another sad story of betrayal. This is a story about the hidden sacrifice of a father who worked 3 jobs night after night so his daughter could grow up without knowing the weight of poverty. This is a story about numbers cold, undeniable, unforgiving. Because emotions can be twisted, memories can be rewritten, but mathematics doesn't lie. So when Emily told me that Rachel would be walking her down the aisle, I didn't fight. I let them think they'd won. But deep down, I made a choice of my own. The truth of 22 years would be revealed in front of every single guest. And it wouldn't be through shouting or begging or speeches about love. It would be through mathematics. Stay with me. Because if you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever been cast aside after giving everything, if you've ever wondered whether choices have consequences, then you're going to want to hear how this ends. This is more than father's revenge. This is the kind of family drama YouTube doesn't forget. And tonight, in front of 150 wedding guests, I proved that love with no boundaries isn't love at all. It's dependency and boundaries. They're the only way the truth ever sets you free. The betrayal didn't come quietly. It wasn't whispered behind closed doors or hidden in paperwork. It happened in public with forks clinking against plates and champagne glasses raised under the warm lights of Romano's Italian restaurant. That's where Emily, my only daughter, the little girl I had raised single-handedly for 22 years, decided to make her announcement. Romano's had always been our spot. Birthdays, graduations, the occasional splurge after good report cards. I'd saved up weeks of overtime so I could take her there when she was 10 and obsessed with spaghetti carbonara. She'd once said Romano's felt like our little castle. But that night when Daniel Hayes' family hosted an engagement celebration with 15 people around a long table, it didn't feel like my castle anymore. It felt like enemy territory. Daniel's parents, Dr. William and Margaret Hayes, were country club, polished, the kind who summered in Maine and wintered in Florida. They fit neatly into the kind of world Emily had been gravitating toward ever since she started dating Daniel, a world of fundraisers, wine tastings, and hushed conversations about investment portfolios. I worked with wrenches and grease. They worked with optics and prestige. And across the table, slipping into the chair beside Emily like she owned, it was Rachel Carter, her so-called real mom. 19 years gone, 19 years of silence, 19 years of me explaining why mommy wasn't coming back. And yet she arrived that night in a designer dress with hair perfectly styled, claiming she'd been in California finding herself. She introduced herself to Daniel's parents as a wellness coach from Marin County, the kind who sells juice cleanses and meditation retreats to people who can afford to pretend they're broken just so they can feel special while being fixed. Emily beamed. She introduced Rachel to everyone with the kind of glow I hadn't seen on her face since she was a child. Everyone, this is my mom, my real mom. That word real hit like a wrench to the chest. I was sitting right beside her, the man who had patched up every scrape, who had sat through every fever, who had worked 3 jobs just to make sure she could go to nursing school without drowning in debt. And now in front of everyone, I was reduced to a placeholder. The conversation flowed easily around me. Rachel charmed them with stories of Bali retreats, Napa Valley wine tastings and her spiritual awakening. Emily soaked up every word, nodding, laughing, clinging to every scrap of the fantasy Rachel painted. Margaret Hayes leaned forward, fascinated, asking about organic juice cleanses. Dr. William gave approving nods. Daniel smiled nervously, caught between two worlds, the one I represented and the one Rachel was selling. Then came dessert. Cannoli shells cracked as waiters cleared plates, and that's when Emily turned to me, her voice careful but firm. Dad, Rachel thinks it would be meaningful if she walked me down the aisle instead of you. The table froze. Forks paused midair. I felt 15 pairs of eyes turned toward me, gauging my reaction. Emily's voice wavered slightly, but she pressed on. It's just, Rachel and I are both on this journey of healing and growth. The Hayeses understand that kind of connection. It would be more authentic if she walked me. Authentic. A word Rachel had slipped into every other sentence that night. Authentic healing, authentic family, authentic self. As if the 2 decades I had spent holding everything together were counterfeit. Rachel placed her hand over Emily's and nodded with a sage smile. Emily is entering a new phase of life. She needs someone who can guide her spiritually, not just someone who raised her. Not just someone who raised her. The words echoed louder than the clatter of dishes. I caught my sister Helen's eyes across the table. Her fork had slipped from her hand. She was staring at Emily like she didn't recognize her. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. His parents exchanged satisfied glances, as if this was exactly the outcome they'd hoped for. They wanted Emily tied to Rachel's glossy narrative, not tethered to the man in a work shirt with grease under his fingernails. Emily's voice grew smaller but sharper, cutting deeper with every word. The truth is, Dad, the Hayeses have certain standards. Their friends, their social circle. Rachel fits into that world better. You're just the man who raised me. There it was, the knife. The verdict delivered at a dinner table where I'd once celebrated her spelling bee win with garlic bread and root beer. I was just the man who raised her, a temporary guardian until the real mom came back to reclaim her prize. Rachel's smile widened, triumphant. Mark did his job, she said lightly, keeping Emily safe until I could return. Now she can have her true family back. The room spun. I looked around and saw polite smiles, awkward coughs, and approving nods from people who didn't know me, who didn't know the sacrifices hidden in every dollar of Emily's education, every late night I spent under a car hood while she slept soundly in the next room. I didn't yell. I didn't slam my fists. I simply nodded once and said, "If that's what you want, Emily, then congratulations. I hope your wedding is everything you dreamed of." She smiled in relief, like I had just solved the tension for her. "Thanks, Dad. I knew you'd understand." But what Emily didn't understand, what no one at that table understood, was that my silence wasn't defeat. My smile wasn't surrender. It was mathematics, and the numbers had already begun to add up. The week after that dinner at Romano's, the betrayal didn't just sit at the table. It spread. Not through whispers, not through awkward phone calls, but through glowing captions and polished pictures on social media. I don't keep Facebook. I don't have Instagram. I've never once thought about what a hashtag could do. But the world I had worked so hard to shield Emily from, the world of optics and curated illusions, became the stage where my role as her father was erased. It started with a post from Rachel Carter, a smiling photo of her and Emily at some trendy brunch spot, mimosas in hand, golden sunlight bouncing off the glass table. The caption read, "Difficult but healing conversation today. Sometimes toxic father figures cling to guilt and control. Grateful Emily is brave enough to choose authentic family over manipulation. Authentic self. Choosing peace. Breaking patterns." I wouldn't have seen it if it weren't for Mrs. Thompson, my neighbor, who caught me at the mailbox one evening. She held her phone out like she was showing me evidence in a courtroom. "Mark, honey, I know this isn't you. Look at this nonsense." And there it was, 43 likes, a dozen comments dripping with sympathy. "So proud of you both for setting boundaries. Healing isn't easy, but it's worth it." That wasn't the Mark Sullivan they knew. I shrugged, more weary than angry, and told Mrs. Thompson not to worry. But it didn't stop there. The next day, Emily herself posted a photo, her and Rachel again, this time outside a florist shop, arms linked like best friends. The caption twisted the knife, learning so much about healthy family dynamics from my mom. Sometimes you have to cut toxic people out even when they're family. It's not punishment, it's protecting your peace. Family drama, chapter, authentic family, chalk, toxic no more. I read those words on Mrs. Thompson's screen and felt the years of scraped knees, late-night hospital stays, and loan payments shrink down to a few hashtags. My entire life's work turned into toxic. But here's the thing about truth, it has witnesses. And sometimes witnesses speak louder than curated captions. The first cracks showed in the comments section. Under Rachel's post, a familiar name popped up. Frank Kowalski, one of my oldest customers. He wrote, "Lady, I don't know who you're talking about, but Mark Sullivan is the most stand-up guy I've ever known. He's been fixing my '85 Corvette for 12 years. Honest, reliable, hardworking. If that's toxic, we need more of it." Then came Maria Santos, who'd been bringing her Honda to Henderson's Auto since before Emily was in high school. She commented, "This can't be true. Mark once stayed late after hours to fix my car when I was 8 months pregnant and desperate. Wouldn't even take extra payment. That's not manipulation, and that's kindness." Within hours, more names appeared. Parents from Emily's school days, former teachers, neighbors who had seen me juggle 3 jobs just to keep Emily in the best schools. One teacher wrote, "Emily, I taught you in 4th grade. Your father never missed a single parent-teacher conference in 6 years. Not one. This is shameful." The tide shifted. What Rachel and Emily thought would be a chorus of support became a courtroom of truth-tellers. Rachel doubled down. She filmed herself in her car, tears glistening perfectly under good lighting, voice trembling as she spoke. People don't understand how emotional blackmail works. Just because someone shows up doesn't mean it's love. Sometimes showing up is control, keeping score, making you feel indebted. Real parents want you to thrive without keeping receipts. But receipts were exactly what I had, and people weren't buying it anymore. Comments under her video grew harsh. "Where were you for 19 years? How dare you criticize the man who raised her? You left and he stayed. That's the only math that matters." Emily tried again with a softer angle. She posted a black and white photo of her holding Rachel's hand, captioned, "Healing childhood trauma. Learning to forgive. Grateful for my mom's return. But forgiveness is hard to sell when the people who watched the truth unfold for 2 decades are still around to tell their stories." By Thursday, Emily had shut off comments on her Instagram. Rachel stopped posting altogether, but the damage was done, and not to me. What they had succeeded in doing was reminding the entire community who I was. They dragged me into the spotlight, hoping to paint me as the villain, but all they'd done was give my neighbors, my customers, and Emily's old teachers the chance to testify on my behalf. At the shop, people came in just to shake my hand. "Don't let them do you like that, Mark. We all know the truth. She'll figure it out someday." It wasn't pity, it was solidarity. The kind of solidarity that Rachel, with all her hashtags and curated brunch photos, could never buy. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight in my chest lighten. Not because I had been vindicated on social media, I couldn't care less about likes or hashtags, but because Emily now had to face something she couldn't ignore, the community she grew up in remembered. And no matter how many captions Rachel wrote, no matter how many mimosas they clinked for the camera, the truth had already spoken louder. And I knew then what I had always known: when it was time to reveal the real mathematics of 22 years, I wouldn't be standing alone. When the noise of social media finally faded, when Rachel's curated posts went silent, and Emily turned off her comments, that was when the real memories came rushing back. Not the kind you post online, the kind that keep you up at night staring at a ceiling fan that never stops turning. I poured myself a cup of coffee at 2 a.m. and spread everything across the kitchen table. 22 years of fatherhood reduced to paper receipts and numbers. I started with the earliest records. Emily had been 7 months old when she spiked a fever of 104. I rushed her to the emergency room, cradling her tiny body against my chest, praying she wouldn't slip away. Insurance covered most of it, but I still paid $1,847 out of pocket. At the time, I was working construction for $12 an hour. That bill cost me 2 full weeks of pay. I sold my only decent set of tools just to cover it. That wasn't a story Rachel could ever tell. When Emily was 9, she needed her tonsils removed. Surgery, anesthesia, and overnight stay in the children's ward. The portion that landed on me, $200. I sold my motorcycle, my only luxury, for that one. I can still remember watching a stranger ride away on it, the rumble of the engine fading, while Emily lay in a hospital bed clutching a teddy bear I'd bought from the hospital gift shop. At 12, she broke her arm falling off her bike. The cast, the orthopedic surgeon, weeks of physical therapy, $650. At 15, she wanted to go to the homecoming dance. Jessica Miller's mom told her she couldn't go because her dress looked cheap. I worked 2 weeks of overtime to buy her a $300 Nordstrom dress so she could walk into that gymnasium with her head held high. I can still see her twirling in front of the mirror, telling me she finally felt beautiful. The dental bills stacked up, 2 braces, retainers, wisdom teeth, extraction. $900 in total. College prep SAT tutors application fees, campus visits for $200. Every one of those checks signed in my name, and then came the Mountain Nursing School. Emily got into her dream program at $52,000 a year. 4 years, $208,000. Add in uniforms, licensing fees, equipment, and board exams, and the number climbed to $220,000. She thought she graduated debt-free because of scholarships. The truth, I called the loan company and transferred the entire debt into my own payments. $2,800 withdrawn every month for 48 months. $400 so far, 12 payments left. I kept flipping through the files, bank statements, timesheets, performance reviews with notes like, Mark is a reliable employee, but frequently requests schedule changes for family commitments. They didn't know those family commitments were concerts, football games, honor society ceremonies. I counted them all, 247 school events, every single one logged, signed, attended. I remembered sitting through orchestra recitals where Emily's violin screeched out of tune, smiling anyway, because she was mine and she was trying. I added it all up. Medical expenses, $89,000. School and activities, $15,000. College and nursing school, $220,000. Living expenses, food, clothing, housing, transportation, over $156,000. Altogether, $1,660,000 invested in one life. My daughter's life. And that doesn't even touch the opportunities I gave up. The job promotion I declined because it required travel. The house I never bought because tuition came first. The nights I stayed home when Jennifer Martinez, my business manager, asked me out because I couldn't risk neglecting Emily. 4 times I turned her down. 4 times I chose Emily's future over my own happiness. I looked at the pile on the table and felt 2 things at once, pride and grief. Pride because I had done it. Against every odd, against every whisper that a mechanic couldn't raise a daughter alone, I had given her everything. And grief because, in her eyes, I was still just the man who happened to be there. I picked up one picture from the stack. Emily at her nursing school graduation. Cap and gown, diploma in hand, smiling so wide you could see every bracket from her braces years earlier. I remembered standing there in the crowd, tears in my eyes, thinking it was worth it. That picture had been taken on May 15th, 2021. 3 days later, her first loan payment had been due. And 3 days later, I started quietly paying $2,800 a month so she wouldn't drown. I put the picture down and stared at the calculator beside me. The total $660,000 glowed like a sentence. It wasn't revenge I was planning. It wasn't cruelty. It was accounting. If Emily wanted to call me a temporary guardian, then it was time for her to understand what that temporary guardianship had really cost. I closed the folders, stacked them neatly, and placed them in a briefcase. My chest was heavy, but my mind was clear. Love without acknowledgement becomes exploitation. Sacrifice without gratitude becomes expectation. And 22 years of silent giving had turned into entitlement the very moment Emily looked me in the eye and said I wasn't her real father. Mathematics doesn't lie even when people do. And at that moment, I knew exactly how I would teach her the lesson she'd spent her whole life avoiding. Choices have consequences, and every unpaid debt comes due. By the time the math was sitting in neat stacks on my kitchen table, I knew silence was no longer enough. I had stayed quiet when Emily called me a temporary guardian. I had smiled when Rachel said she was her real mom. But numbers have a way of demanding balance. And if Emily was going to walk down that aisle with the woman who abandoned her, then it was time for her to face the real cost of her choices. That meant preparing my response, not in anger, not in shouting, but in precision. The first step was simple. I picked up the phone late one night, dialed the student loan company, and let the automated system run its course. Press 1 to make a payment, press 2 to change payment information, press 3 to cancel automatic withdrawals. My thumb hovered, then press 3. The voice asked me to confirm cancel automatic payments effective immediately or set a future cancellation date. I scrolled through the calendar in my head, then spoke clearly. November 4th, 2024, the day after Emily's wedding. That meant on November 15th, instead of a hidden transfer from my account, she'd be staring at a $2,800 bill with her name on it. And 30 days after that, she'd be racking up late fees. 90 days she'd face default. 120 days her credit would start to collapse. I didn't need to yell. I just needed to stop doing what I had been doing. That was the difference between love and enabling. Next, I turned my attention to the venue. Riverside Gardens, a manicured estate on the banks of the river, complete with a white gazebo and a restored 1920s mansion. Emily had bragged about how Rachel had taken care of it, how Patricia Hayes was so impressed with the booking. What she didn't know was that 3 months earlier, Rachel had called me crying, voice trembling, like a bad actress auditioning for sympathy. "Mark, this is my chance to prove I can do something real for Emily. But they won't let me put down a deposit without cash up front. Please, if you help me, I'll pay you back from my coaching business." Of course, she never had the money. Of course, she never intended to. But I wrote the check anyway. $45,000 pulled straight from my business account cashier's check made out in Rachel's name. Why? Because at the time I thought I'd be the one standing with Emily under that gazebo. That was before Rachel swooped in to rebrand herself as the savior. That paper trail my check was sitting in a folder, now ready to be shown at the perfect time. Then there was the proposal. Emily had gushed for weeks about Daniel's romantic surprise. The private evening among vintage Mustangs and Corvettes, white roses, and candles dinner set up in a so-called museum. Daniel had paid $15,000 for that 4-hour rental, believing he was dealing with a wealthy collector. The truth, he was dealing with me. Vintage Motors and Restoration wasn't a museum. It was my shop, my pride, my retirement plan. Michael Hayes had unwittingly paid me for the privilege of proposing to my daughter in a building I'd been quietly running since 2018. And the invoice signed, dated with his signature, was in my briefcase too. Another receipt, another fact to show what happens when people confuse optics for reality. Finally, there was the car, the 1967 Mustang convertible candy apple, red-white leather seats, chrome bumpers shining like mirrors. The car Emily had posed beside for engagement photos, the car she had told Daniel she wanted as their perfect exit. Daniel had been calling my business manager for weeks trying to track down the owner, desperate to buy it. The contract he signed months earlier listed the rental at $42,000 if purchased with an option for a one-day rental at $500. And tucked inside that contract was a clause that most people would have skimmed right over. Vehicle may only be driven by renter or immediate family members. Immediate family. At the time, it had just been legal language boilerplate to protect liability. Now it was the sharpest weapon in my arsenal, because Emily had looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't her real family anymore. Well, contracts don't lie, and neither do clauses. One by one, I stacked these documents into a single briefcase. The loan records, the cashier's check for the venue, the invoice for the proposal, the Mustang rental contract. Together, they told a story numbers never distort. $45,000, $15,000, $2,800 times 48, $660,000 in total. While Rachel had been posting hashtags about authentic family, I'd been paying the bills. While Emily had been sipping mimosas and writing captions about toxic dependency, I had been underwriting her entire life. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. Revenge is emotional. This was about accountability, about showing my daughter and everyone who thought I was just the man who happened to be there, that mathematics has a voice louder than any curated Instagram feed. I locked the briefcase, set it by the door, and sat back in my chair. November 3rd was coming. Emily thought her perfect wedding day would be polished, seamless, authentic. What she didn't know was that 20 minutes after she said, I do those carefully constructed illusions were going to collapse under the weight of receipts. Numbers don't cry, they don't beg, they don't ask for forgiveness. Numbers just add up. And Emily was about to learn exactly what her sum looked like. November 3rd dawned clear and sharp, the kind of autumn day photographers dream about. Emily's wedding was set at Riverside Gardens, the place where my $45,000 check had paved the way for chandeliers, champagne fountains, and manicured lawns. I spent the morning polishing the Mustang, the very car they'd be counting on for their grand exit. The candy apple red gleamed in the sunlight, the chrome bumpers shining like truth itself. By the time I trailered it to the venue, my plan was set. At 7:30 p.m., the reception hall glittered like a magazine spread. White linens, crystal chandeliers, and orchestra playing softly in the corner. Through the tall windows, I could see Emily in her $3,800 gown, radiant, smiling, clinking glasses with guests who had no idea what was about to happen. Rachel stood at her side, soaking up every glance like a queen reclaiming her throne. I waited until the father of the bride's speech. That was my cue. Except the microphone wasn't in my hands, it was in Rachel's. She stood tall, lavender dress, flowing voice smooth as she told her version of history. Emily has shown us all that healing is possible, that families can be redefined. Love isn't about obligation, it's about choosing who helps you grow. To Emily and Daniel, may your marriage be built on authenticity and courage. Applause thundered, glasses clinked, and then silence as I stepped into the room. The crowd turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. 150 pairs of eyes locked on the man in the dark suit walking slowly carrying a briefcase. Emily's face drained of color. Rachel's smile froze. Daniel stood up unsure if he should intercept me or let me pass. I walked to the head table, set my briefcase down, and said evenly, "My name is Mark Sullivan. I'm the father of the bride." Gasps rippled through the room. Some guests whispered. Others just stared. Rachel's voice cut and brittle. "Mark, you're not welcome here." I looked straight at her. "Maybe not, but the truth is," I turned to the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard a speech about authenticity, about family. Let me give you some numbers to go with those words." I pulled the first folder from the briefcase, held it up. Student loans. Emily thought they were forgiven. In reality, I paid $2,800 every month for 48 months. That's $134,400 so far. 12 payments left. Starting tomorrow, those payments stop. The room murmured. Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. "Dad, please," I raised a hand. Next item. The venue. I held up the copy of the cashier's check. Riverside Gardens. $45,000 deposit. Rachel signed the paperwork. But the money came from my account. That's the only reason we're standing in this beautiful hall tonight. Rachel tried to interject, but I cut her off. The proposal. I flipped open another folder. Daniel paid $15,000 to rent a so-called classic car museum. That was my shop, my business, Vintage Motors and Restoration. He paid me for the privilege of proposing to Emily in the space I've been running since 2018. Gasps grew louder. I could see Daniel's face pale as realization sank in. Finally, I pulled out the Mustang contract. And now the car outside. The 1967 Mustang convertible you've all seen in the engagement photos, the one meant to whisk the happy couple away tonight. According to the rental agreement signed by your groom, the car may only be driven by the renter or his immediate family members. I paused, my gaze fixed on Emily. "Emily, are you my immediate family?" The silence was crushing. The orchestra had stopped playing. The waiters froze in the doorway. Emily's shoulders shook as tears ran down her cheeks. "Dad, please." I didn't shout. I didn't rage. My voice stayed calm, steady. For 22 years, I was more than immediate family. I was the only family. I covered medical bills, school dances, braces, college tuition. $660,000 invested in you. Rachel contributed nothing. She walked away for 19 years, and now you tell me she's your real family. Then tell me, Emily. Right now. Are you my immediate family, or are you hers? Rachel shot up from her chair, her voice shrill. This is manipulation. No, I said firmly. This is mathematics. Mathematics doesn't lie even when people do. I set the keys to the Mustang on the table. So what's it going to be, Emily? If I'm not your father, then you can't drive my car. If Rachel is your real family, then she can find you a ride home." The silence stretched until it broke into sobs. Emily buried her face in her hands. Daniel looked helpless, torn between his bride and the truth unraveling in front of him. Guests shifted uncomfortably, whispering, pointing, some shaking their heads in disgust at Rachel. I picked up my briefcase, straightened my jacket, and spoke one last time. "Enjoy the reception. The math has been presented. The rest is your choice." Then I turned and walked out, leaving 150 guests in stunned silence, a bride in tears, and a mother exposed by numbers that could never be erased. When I turned my back on that ballroom, the silence that followed was deafening. My footsteps echoed on the polished floors, each one punctuated by the weight of 22 years finally spoken aloud. But silence never lasts long, not in a room full of 150 people who just had their illusions ripped to shreds. I had barely crossed the threshold when the noise erupted. Behind me, the ballroom burst into a chaos of whispers, gasps, and sharp-edged conversations. Guests leaned into each other, hands covering mouths, eyes darting between Emily and her wedding gown, and Rachel standing rigid at the head table. I didn't need to see it to know the scene: champagne glasses left untouched, forks dropped mid-bite, an entire room recalibrating what it thought it knew. Rachel's lavender mask of calm was the first to crack. I heard her voice, tight, panicked, rising above the noise. "He's lying. He's manipulating you." None of that is true, but the problem with receipts is that they don't shout. They don't need to. They just exist. And when people hear numbers, exact numbers, with dates and amounts, they stick. $134, $400 in loan payments, $45,000 for the venue, $15,000 for the proposal, $660,000 over 22 years. Mathematics doesn't negotiate. The more Rachel insisted, the worse it became. Whispers turned into pointed stares. A woman in a sequined dress muttered, 19 years gone, and she calls herself the mother. Another man shook his head. Unbelievable. He raised that girl alone. The tide of sympathy that Rachel had counted on dried up in a matter of minutes. Emily sat frozen, her makeup streaked with tears, mascara carving black lines down her cheeks. The bride who had walked into the room, radiant and adored, was now small, crumpled, gripping the edge of the table, like it was the only thing holding her upright. I had given her the truth, and the truth had landed heavier than any punishment could. Daniel Hayes looked like a man caught in a storm without shelter. His hand hovered near Emily's shoulder, unsure whether to comfort her or recoil from the reality unraveling in front of his family's eyes. His parents, Dr. William and Margaret, wore expressions that said everything without words: shock, embarrassment, calculation. They had backed the wrong horse. They had thrown their weight behind Rachel, the authentic mother, only to watch her credibility collapse in real time. I could almost hear Margaret Hayes' carefully curated reputation fracturing as guests murmured, "They didn't even vet the story doctor." William's jaw tightened, his golf club smile replaced by something sour, as though he'd swallowed glass. Meanwhile, the younger guests, Emily's friends from nursing school, Daniel's colleagues, were glued to their phones. Notifications popped up as people whispered, "This is going online." Hashtags were already forming before dessert hit the tables. Yet your receipts don't lie. Father of the bride. Family drama. Within hours, Rachel's narrative about healing and toxic fathers would be drowned by the viral replay of a man calmly laying down facts that couldn't be spun. I didn't stay to see the rest, but word travels fast in a town like ours. Later, I heard Rachel tried to give another speech, her voice trembling, accusing me of abuse of financial control, of keeping score. But when she raised her glass, no one followed. When she asked for applause, silence swallowed her whole. Her credibility evaporated. That was the night Rachel Carter stopped being the triumphant real mom and became what she had always been, the woman who left. For Emily, the fall was harder. Guests approached her cautiously, offering words she couldn't accept. "We didn't know, Emily. Your dad is a good man. You should talk to him." Each sentence was a hammer striking the fragile glass of the story Rachel had sold her. The girl who had once believed she could rewrite history with hashtags now sat shattered in her own wedding gown, mascara-smeared lips trembling, whispering over and over, "I didn't know. I didn't know." Daniel, to his credit, stayed by her side, but the look in his eyes said it all. doubt, disappointment, and a flicker of fear. He had married into a family drama bigger than anything he had bargained for. He had watched the man he thought was an embarrassment stand tall with proof in hand while the woman his fiancée called authentic crumbled. And me, I didn't need revenge. I didn't need applause. I had walked in with a briefcase of receipts and walked out with the only thing I had ever wanted, the truth, undeniable, undeniable to Emily, undeniable to Rachel, undeniable to every person in that hall. The fallout was swift and merciless. Rachel's social media accounts went dark. Emily's friends stopped reposting her hashtags. The Hayes family retreated embarrassed, scrambling to salvage their image. But Emily, my daughter, was left with the heaviest consequence, the knowledge that in trying to erase me, she had erased the very foundation her life had been built on. And that I realized was the real price of betrayal. Not money, not reputation. But the moment when the story you told yourself collapses and all that's left is the truth staring you in the face. The moment I dropped those words, "Are you my immediate family?" the air in that ballroom changed. For a few heartbeats, no one moved. No one breathed. The orchestra stopped mid-note, waiters froze in the doorways, and the clinking of silverware fell silent like someone had cut the power. The only sound was Emily's shallow, ragged breathing as she clutched the edge of the head table, her knuckles white against the linen. I turned and walked away, briefcase in hand, the Mustang keys no longer theirs to claim. Behind me, 150 guests sat in stunned silence, their heads swiveling between a sobbing bride and the mother who had just been exposed. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Rachel was the first to break the quiet. Her voice cut across the room, higher, thinner, trembling with desperation. "He's lying. He's manipulating all of you. Don't believe him," but her words sounded hollow, bouncing off the walls without finding purchase. Because the problem with receipts is that they don't require belief, they just exist. Dates, amounts, signatures, proof that can't be wished away by lavender dresses and hashtags. Whispers began to ripple through the room. A man at table 6 leaned toward his wife. 19 years gone, and she calls herself the mother. A woman in sequins shook her head. Unbelievable. That man raised her alone. Each whisper spread, each murmur cut another thread in the image Rachel had so carefully crafted. Rachel tried again, louder this time, her voice teetering between rage and panic. "Don't let him ruin this night. He's just bitter. He's always been controlling." But the guests weren't nodding. They weren't clapping. They were staring at her with the kind of cold judgment you can't spin away. Emily sat crumpled in her gown, mascara streaking down her cheeks in black rivers. She wasn't radiant anymore. She was small, fragile, her world collapsing around her in real time. I didn't know she whispered over and over like a mantra that might undo the truth. I didn't know, but she did know, or rather she had chosen not to. And now in front of everyone, she couldn't look away. Daniel looked like a man who had been punched in the gut. He stood stiff beside her, one hand hovering near her shoulder, unsure if comfort was even possible. His eyes darted from me to Emily to Rachel, and I could see the calculation in his expression, the realization that his perfect marriage had just become a storm. His parents, Dr. William and Margaret Hayes, were worse. Margaret's face was a mask of horror, her country club smile gone stiff. Dr. William looked furious, not at me but at himself for being played, for letting Rachel into his circle without vetting the truth. The Hayes family's prized reputation had been stained by association, and they knew it. Then came the phones. The younger guests, Emily's nursing school friends and Daniel's colleagues, pulled them out, fingers flying. "This is going online," someone whispered. And just like that, the hashtags that Rachel had once weaponized against me turned on her. Receipts don't lie. Father of the bride, just a family drama. By the time dessert reached the tables, the first clips would already be circulating, and no curated brunch photo could stop it. I wasn't there to watch the rest unfold, but word travels fast. Later I heard that Rachel tried to stand again to give another speech. Her voice shook as she accused me of emotional blackmail, of keeping score. She lifted her glass, begging for applause. No one followed. When she sat down, the silence around her was heavier than any rejection I could have spoken aloud. Emily didn't move for the rest of the night. She sat there in her white dress, head bowed, tears staining silk that had been spotless hours earlier. Every so often she whispered, "I'm sorry," but not to the guests, not to Daniel, not even to Rachel. It was to herself, to the version of herself that had believed she could erase 2 decades of sacrifice with hashtags and smiles. Daniel stayed by her side, but I'm told his expression said it all. Doubt, fear, disappointment. He had married a woman who had believed a lie, and now that lie had collapsed under the weight of receipts. His perfect wedding night had turned into a public reckoning, and Rachel, who had strutted into Romano's in a designer dress, Rachel, who had announced to the world that she was back as the real mom, was left exposed. Not as a savior, not as authentic, just as what she had always been, the woman who left. I didn't need to win applause. I didn't need anyone to pat me on the back. I walked out of that ballroom with something stronger than revenge. I walked out with the truth laid bare, undeniable in front of every single person who mattered to Emily. That was enough. The fallout was swift. Rachel's accounts went dark. Emily's friends stopped reposting her captions. The Hayes family retreated, scrambling to clean up the stain. But Emily was left with the heaviest consequence of all. She had to live with the knowledge that the foundation of her life, every bill paid, every sacrifice made, was built by the man she had dismissed as temporary. That was the real punishment. Not my words, not the receipts, but the mirror the truth held up to her in front of 150 witnesses, where she could no longer hide from who I had been and who she had chosen to forget. 3 days after the wedding, my phone was still silent. No calls, no texts. The Mustang sat back in my shop, its paint gleaming under the fluorescent lights, while I ran a rag over the chrome like it needed my attention. The truth was, I was avoiding the quiet. Silence has a way of echoing louder than shouting when you've just torn open a lie in front of 150 people. On the 4th night, the text finally came. A number I didn't recognize. Dad, this is Emily. New phone. Linda cut off my old one. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering over the keyboard. A week earlier, she had called Rachel her real mom. A week earlier, she had looked me in the eye and told me I was just the man who raised her. And now suddenly I was dad again. I typed back slowly, when you're ready to discuss the $33,600 in student loans left, call me. Until then, enjoy your authentic family. Hours later, the phone rang. Her voice on the other end was small, cracked with tears. Dad, please, don't hang up. I didn't. I just listened as she tried to steady herself. I didn't know about the loans. I didn't know about the shop or the venue. I thought you didn't want to be part of it. I believed her. I believed Rachel. Her words tumbled over each other, clumsy, broken. Dad, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please, I need you. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I heard her as a little girl again, standing in the garage with plastic tools, asking if she could help change the oil. But I couldn't let nostalgia drown me. I had promised myself love with boundaries, support with conditions, never again silent sacrifice that turned into entitlement. Emily, I said slowly, I'll always love you, but love isn't the same as rescue. You're 25 years old. It's time you carry your own weight. She sniffled. I will. I promise I will. I've already called the loan company. They said I can take over the payments. I'm going to make them, Dad. Every month. I'll figure it out. For the first time, she sounded like an adult, not a child demanding, but a woman accepting. I nodded to myself. Good, that's a start. She rushed on, desperate. I ended things with Rachel. I told her I can't live in lies anymore. She called me ungrateful, but I don't care. I know what she did, what she didn't do. I know now. I didn't gloat. I didn't say I told you so. I just let the silence stretch until she added, almost whispering, Can I still call you Dad? I swallowed hard. You can call me Dad when you act like my daughter. Words don't mean much without choices. On the other end of the line, she sobbed. Then I'll prove it. I'll pay the loans. I'll come by the shop. I'll help however I can. I don't want your money. I want your respect back. Those words pierced deeper than any apology. Respect back. Not money, not handouts. Respect. In the weeks that followed, she began to act on it. She took extra shifts at the hospital, sometimes calling me exhausted but proud. The first loan payment she made herself, she texted me a screenshot, $2,800 pulled from her account. No hashtags, no captions, just proof. I didn't reply with a lecture. I just sent back 3 words. Proud of you. We didn't meet face to face right away. It was better that way. Space gave her the chance to stand on her own. But slowly a rhythm began. She'd call me once a week sometimes, crying, sometimes laughing, always ending with, "I love you, Dad." And each time I let her say it, but I didn't let the word wipe away the debt of actions. Love had to be lived, not spoken. Rachel, meanwhile, disappeared from the picture. Her social media stayed dark, her credibility shredded. She called Emily, once tried to shame her for choosing me over her, but Emily hung up. That was the day I knew the tide had turned. Not because Emily chose me, but because she chose truth over illusion. And me, I didn't run back in with open arms. I set boundaries. When she asked if I could help with rent, I told her no. When she wondered if I might cover her car repairs, I said the shop was closed to favors. It hurt to say it, but it was necessary. Because for the first time, Emily was learning to live without the invisible safety net I had spent 2 decades weaving. She once asked timidly, "Do you still love me?" I answered honestly, "Yes, Emily. But love isn't a blank check. It's earned every day with respect and responsibility. You're finally learning that. Don't stop." And as I hung up the phone, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Peace. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't, but because for the first time Emily was facing the truth head on. And the truth, like mathematics, doesn't lie. When I finally walked out of Riverside Gardens that night, the crisp November air hit me like a reset button. Behind me, the glittering ballroom, the flowers, the chandeliers, the champagne, all of it had turned into a courtroom of truth. I didn't leave with applause. I didn't leave with cheers. I left with silence. And silence, when it carries the weight of receipts, is louder than any ovation. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because what had to be said was already spoken. What had to be shown was already seen. For 22 years, I had carried the weight of sacrifice alone. That night, I laid it down for everyone to witness. Mathematics doesn't lie, even when people do. Choices have consequences. Those weren't just words for Emily, they were for me, for Rachel, for anyone who's ever tried to twist sacrifice into control or rewrite history with hashtags. Emily's story didn't end at the reception. It began after it. For the first time in her adult life, she had to walk into the world without me covering her bills, without me carrying her debts. She started paying her loans. She started cutting ties with the illusions Rachel spun. She started learning that love isn't proven by speeches or pictures, but by responsibility. That's when she called me Dad again, and not out of entitlement, but out of recognition. And me, I finally understood that loving your child doesn't mean shielding them from consequences. It means letting them face them, even if it breaks your heart. Especially if it breaks your heart. That's the real lesson here, not just for Emily, not just for me, but maybe for you too. If you've ever given everything and been told you were just there, if you've ever been written out of your own story by someone chasing a shinier illusion, remember this: the truth has receipts. And when the time comes, those receipts will speak louder than any accusation. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever seen sacrifice mistaken for control? Have you ever been cast aside after giving everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Save this story if it struck a nerve, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of family drama and consequences. Because one thing's for certain in life, in family and betrayal, choices always add up, and mathematics never lies.